그야말로 아트의 열기가 정말 따끈따끈한 것 같습니다. 정말 이렇게 많은 해외의 미술과 관계된 미술관들뿐만 아니라 당연히 아주 국제적인 화랑부터 예술가부터 또 미술관 큐레이터들, 관장님들, 콜렉터들까지 이번에 한 60개 프라이빗 제트로 한국에 콜렉터들이 또 왔다는 얘기도 들었는데요. 정말 이렇게 약간 열기가 올라가고 있는 가운데 우리가 조금은 조심하게 좀 앉아서 한번 짚어보고 생각해야 될 것들을 얘기하는 것은 그 어떤 것보다 더 중요하다고 생각합니다. 그래서 저희가 SUUM ART FORUM을 2022년에 키아프와 프리즈가 시작되면서 별마당 도서관에서 아주 크게 시작을 했습니다. 그 이후에 작년에는 우리 럭스 미디아아트 전시와 더불어 현대미술 작가와 또 서울 건축 비엔날레와 관계된 건축가님들 모시고 진행을 했고요. 이번 3회를 맞아서는 저희가 이렇게 바뀌어가는 시대에 특별히 AI가 정말 우리의 주변과 삶으로 껑충 들어온 이런 상황에 우리가 한번 현대미술의 담론을 얘기해보는 좀 심각한 1시부터 4시 반까지 심각한 토론회 장을 만들어보자 하는 내용으로 정말 귀한 분들을 모셨습니다. 특별히 오늘 이런 자리를 만들면서 저희가 뉴욕타임즈의 정말 그 편집장으로서 이제 Democracy Culture Foundation을 그리스 아테네에 만들어서 Art for Tomorrow라는 그런 아트 포럼을 진행하는 우리 아킬레스 단타스님과 더불어 SUUM과 파트너십을 만들었습니다. 우선 잠시 인사를 드리게 하고 제가 진행을 하도록 하겠습니다. Would you please stand up to say hello to everyone? Yeah, would you like to say it, Mark?
Hello everyone, delighted to be here and to be partnering with Ji-Yoon Lee and SUUM Project, and we look forward to hearing all about the paradigm shifts of our times.
Yeah, thank you very much. 네, 그래서 앞으로는 좀 더 저희가 정말 그 글로벌 현장에서 이루어지는 현대미술의 담론을 우리 서울의 현장에서 그냥 잠시 와서 인사말 5분, 10분 하고 가는 것이 아니라 정말 진지하게 이 내용들을 한번 연구하고 우리가 학제적으로 접근해서라도 정말 공부해보자라는 시간으로 바쁜 프리즈나 키아프가 시작되기 전에 오늘 이 자리에 모였습니다. 특별히 이번에 더욱 의미 있는 것은 우리가 이 DDP에서 이 멋진 곳에서 DDP 10주년을 맞이해서 우리 이경돈 대표님께서 저희를 초청해 주셔서 함께 공동으로 주최하는 아트 포럼이 되었습니다. 이렇게 저희는 왜냐하면 저희가 이 기획을 만들면서 이러저러한 얘기도 많고 또 어떻게 이런 포럼을 만들까 생각하면서 그런 편한 내용을 아나운서께서 전달하기가 때로는 많이 힘들더라고요. 그래서 오늘 이제 시작을 하게 되겠습니다. 그래서 제가 사실 이렇게 인사말만 하고 사회 보려고 그러는데 제가 첫 번째 세션에 나오게 됩니다. 잘 봐주세요. 네, 그래서 오늘 이 첫 번째 포럼을 시작하게 될 우리 정말 뉴욕타임즈와 만든 Art for Tomorrow의 아주 멋진 킴 코니프 테일러께서 직접 모더레이팅을 해서 우리를 진행해 주시도록 하겠습니다. 자, 이제 첫 번째 세션 가장 중요한 주제일 텐데요. 글쎄요, 이제 한국에도 미술관의 시대가 이미 왔고 더욱더 활발히 진행되고 있습니다. 이런 미술관의 시대 때 세계적인 미술관을 운영하는 그런 디렉터들은, 그런 큐레이터들은 어떤 질문들과 어떤 고민들을 하고 있을까를 질문해보는 첫 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 Art for Tomorrow의 킴 코니프를 소개합니다. 감사합니다. I can hold this one. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Conniff Taber, as Ji-Yoon just introduced, and I am very pleased to be here today for the SUUM Art Forum. I'm the editorial director of the Democracy and Culture Foundation. Sorry, I don't understand Korean, but I gathered that you've already heard what we're all about. We run the Art for Tomorrow conference, which takes place each year in a different city. It started at the New York Times in 2015. So I'm very pleased to be here today with an illustrious panel. Ji-yoon is taking her place as a panelist, Ulrich Obrist, the artistic director of Serpentine Galleries, and Marcello Dantas, who wears many hats, but one of which is the director of the SFER IK Museum in Tulum, Mexico, and another project we'll hear about later that he's developing in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, that opens next week. So we are here to talk about designing the institution of tomorrow. And in a way, museums have always been expected to reflect the complexity of the world around them. But now, in the times that we're living in, with 2 wars on, the climate emergency wreaking havoc around the world, AI and other technologies accelerating at a breakneck pace, it seems to be even more of an imperative for institutions to reflect on and respond to the urgency of the problems around them. They're expected to react quickly, to stage ambitious exhibitions, and to put together very complex collaborations. But all of this, you may have guessed, costs money. So how do we fund these increasingly complex collaborations? And the funding models are changing. In most places, museums and institutions have to contend with less public funding than they may have received in the past. So they have to be creative and build new kinds of partnerships. So that's what we're going to hear about today. I'm lucky to be here today with 3 leaders who have ample experience in this and have pulled off pretty amazing feats. So I want to turn first to Ji-yoon, who I know gave a little bit of an introduction, but because she's our hostess here, she's the former managing director, many of you know, of the MCA here in Seoul, but also through SUUM Project. For the past many years, you've worked with art institutions, biennales, organizing more than 100, maybe hundreds, of contemporary art exhibitions. So my question to you, Ji-yoon, is how do you do it? How do you pull it off? Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of the landscape and how it's changed?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very, very glad Ulrich and Marcello Dantas, you're all coming together for this amazing conversation together. I think, it's a very interesting moment right now, how we see museum. Because there are many words of museum or art center is really providing, in everywhere. Because art became such a hot issue. But I think, when we're approaching to this term of museum, of art center, well, now architecture, not only art and architecture and design, I think, we really have to think about how we are going to make museum, how we are going to run the museum, what sort of contents and what kind of program it is going to be possible. Because, maybe I can start with one of the very starting point of MMCA case. Because MMCA, I think that we must be very proud of, we are having finally great national modern and contemporary art museum in the heart of Seoul. And then when we, open the museum, it's 100% government funding institution. So every single penny comes from the government. So even we sell lots of books, all the money comes back to the treasury. So in a way, at 100% government funding, and then when we, give commission to artists to make one artwork, because if it is over $20,000, like 2천만 won in Korean language, if I say that, then we have to put a bidding, tender, process, we have to do that. But the space is vast and huge. The space is like 30,000 square meter, and then we have never have that kind of big, gigantic spaces for 8 galleries. But every time, artist wants to produce some work, it's much more material cost it might recurs. So we set up a MMCA foundation to be able to get the money from the corporation. And then as you can see, MMCA Hyundai Motors, they spent like 1.1 2 million US dollars per year for last 10 years. It is going to finish that project this year. And then the Hyundai card, they sponsor MoMA PS1 and the MMCA Seoul. We made an architecture project. So young architect project, we make it possible. And the SBS continuously support for 올해의 작가당, Korean Artist Prize. So, I mean, some people say that, oh, you are the institution who got all the big money from the government. But why you get, all this, money from the corporation? But it was all about the relating to the art production. To be able to make Korean artists or any, artist producing the artwork, sometimes we need some bigger funding to producing the exhibition, because I think, museum is the place not only hang the painting from the artist studio. Nowadays, you really have to work on the space with a designer, with the architect, producing the work and showing the new work, commissioning the artist to make something impossible to possible in the space. That sort of, very inspirational place, I think we have to build on. But without that kind of, special foundation model, we realize that it's not possible. That's why, in a way, one of the great, work labels, the City of Soleil, 태양의 도시, the piece has been, made year 2014. That piece, toured to the Palais de Tokyo in Paris and all the other, cities in the internationally. So I think, from year 2014, in last 10 years, I think Korea really has developed various ways how to support, how to produce the new work through the institution, public institution. But at the same time, I think Korea, at the moment, in a way, it's great. The Amory Pacific Museum, Sonje Art Museum, also recently Futura Museum by Hans with a great Refik Anadol exhibition. I think now we are really come across the idea museum is the place where we can support artists to produce the work and then we produce the exhibition. So curators becoming a producer. So maybe, that sort of a discussion we'd like to carry on more, and then we'd like to hear more from our great experts, colleagues.
Thank you. That's a perfect introduction because in the past 10 years and more, you've seen production costs skyrocket as tastes have shifted and artists' tastes have shifted to these more immersive works that we're going to be talking about throughout the day today. And so I love the creative way that you set up kind of a parallel structure to deal with that. And I know that Hans Ulrich, I'd like to turn to you now because I know that you've been very creative in the way that you've put together partnerships at the Serpentine between public, private, corporations, private donors. So I was hoping that maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. But first, I just want to give a little bit of an overview. So this year, you worked with a Korean architect for the pavilion, the summer pavilion, Min-Suk Cho. And you've also worked, of course, on many, many exhibitions likes of Inka Schöneberg, Judy Chicago, and that's just like in the past year or so. And then, of course, as Ji-yoon mentioned, you were working on the Futura, the opening of Futura, which happens, I think, tonight with Refik Anadol. So you're no stranger to new paradigms. And so, again, I'd just love for you to tell us a little bit, maybe some key points of the partnerships that you've been able to put together to make these very ambitious exhibitions happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for these questions, and it's such a pleasure to be here. It's almost 30 years ago, it was in 1995 and 96 that I came to Seoul for the first time with my partner Koo Jong-ah when we worked with Hu Han-ru on a show called Cities on the Move, where we brought artists like Koo Jong-ah, Lee Bull, or Suja Kim, for the first time to a series of, European museums. And ever since, it's always amazing to come back to Seoul and see new generations of artists here. I wanted to answer two things, because you began actually by lining out these challenges, of these big topics. And in relation to the question here also about tomorrow, about the future, a very wonderful book has just come out a few days ago by Roman Kajanik, the philosopher, called History for Tomorrow, which I think deeply connects to the topic of today. And he really lines out the big challenges of the 21st century, you know, the environmental aspect you addressed, the importance of nurturing tolerance, which I think is something which is so important in our world, the idea of kicking the consumer habit, you know, to go beyond consuming, to go beyond event culture, also taming social media, securing, you know, resources like water for all, reviving faith in democracy, very much connected again to the topic here, managing the genetic revolution, bridging inequality, and other, you know, these are all key topics, keeping the machines under control, you know, the question of AI, and averting a civilizational breakdown. And of course, always the question of hope. And I think that's, again, where art enters, no? I think Gerhard Richter once said, art is the highest form of hope. And I do think this is, you know, very, very relevant for today. But what is also relevant is that in order to address these challenges, we need new collaborations, we need new alliances, we need to bring things together. You know, we need not separation, but in a way, togetherness. And in order to do that, I think we not only need alliances between museums among themselves, you know, of course we need to collaborate among colleagues, that's a given, but we also need to collaborate with other entities, you know, non-museum entities. We need to go into society, that's very important, and we need to also think how we actually have to structurally change museums within. So for example, at the Serpentine, when I joined the Serpentine in 2006, we slowly, because that doesn't happen from one day to the next, started to create new departments, no? The first department we created was a department for technology. We appointed a chief technology officer because we don't understand and didn't understand why almost every company has a chief technology officer, but why would a museum, you know, not have a CTO? So we created a whole technology department around that. We now have 5 curators, you know, who can do video games, develop video games, we do future reports for the whole sector. In a way, we want to be useful for the sector. The second department is the ecology department, because we created a general ecology project thinking that, you know, it's not enough to just do an ecology project from time to time, but this needs to be part of everything we do. And that means we need a department for that. And the third one is civic, where we think all the time, you know, that addresses also the topic of inequality, where we think about this idea, how we can actually go beyond the doors, you know, of the museum, because what happens in a museum happens behind doors. But how can we go with art into society? So these 3 departments were created, and for us, is very important. And then, based on that, you know, it is about creating many, many different partnerships. You mentioned, you know, Refik Anadol. We're going to open this show tonight with his new initiative of Deho Ku, who is doing Futura Sol. It will be the first show here. That was the inaugural show of our year of AI at the Serpentine, which marks our 10 years of working with AI. We did projects with Pierre Wieg, with Hito Steil, with Ian Cheng, with James Bridle, many others, about AI. And now for the 10th anniversary, we declared it the year of AI. And this will then continue in autumn with an exhibition of Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst about choirs from all over the UK, where they're basically going to create a participatory piece and the whole idea of ethically sourced data, where basically all the data belong to the choirs who participate, the artwork, you know, belongs to them. So that, of course, means, you know, lots of different alliances, collaborations, you know, by sourcing, ethically sourcing these data. But it also means, because you mentioned how to finance such projects, it means also alliances with technology partners. For example, for our whole work with video games, and I think we should take into account that today, 3 billion people on the planet play video games. 3 billion people play video games. That's more than 1/3 of the world population. So video games is bigger than the music and the film industry combined. And so, you know, that is a huge possibility for museums, because artists are interested in that medium. So we, for example, collaborated with Cars and Fortnite and The Cute, and we were for 2 weeks on the landing page of Fortnite, and with a digital serpentine, and that means that we had 152 million visitors, mostly very young visitors, and then a few days later, many of these visitors came to the museum. They came to the Serpentine. So all of a sudden, you had 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old teenagers who brought their parents to the museum. So that's the collaboration, with Acute and Fortnite. We also worked with Tezos on sustainable and also participatory blockchain pieces where we, give for free to the visitors NFT. So it's almost like a virtual postcard. It's a souvenir visitors can take of their visit. We had, thanks to the Tezos partnership, we developed a video game with Gabriel Massan, a very young, Brazilian artist who is incredibly talented, and they worked with many different artists in a very collaborative way. And this video game inspired Madonna for her tour, and Madonna brought Gabriel Massan into her show, and again it reached through that millions and millions of people. Another interesting alliance was our collaboration with BTS, because we collaborated with Daeyoung as part of this BTS Connect, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. Again, it was a very interesting experience because we had Jakob Knut-Steensen, and that shows us also that these things are not separated. We spoke about that before, that in a way topics like inequality, technology, ecology, all of these topics are holistic. They have to be addressed in the museum, not in a separated way. We discussed it before over lunch. So with Jakob Knut-Steensen, we created a project which brought technology and ecology together and really show how technology can foster an attention to the natural world. Also sometimes a spiritual attention with nature, and where we can actually create, through that combination of art and digital technology and the natural world, in a way, new narratives about the future. So that was another, partnership with BTS. Then more recently, we collaborated also with a young artist, Alvaro Barrington, and the London Lions. So we created a basketball court outside the Serpentine, in a neighborhood in London, where basically Alvaro designed the basketball court, commissioned, by this team. And there are many, many, many more such, examples. You mentioned the pavilion. That's maybe the last example I'm going to give. The pavilion is an annual scheme. We build every year a pavilion in front of the Serpentine, an architectural structure which is there for a couple of months. And this year is a Korean architect, Min-suk Cho, whom I'm sure many of you know, because Min-suk has built a lot in Seoul, but hasn't built in London, because we always invite architects to do the first building, in London. It's an idea of bringing new voices of architecture. And that has been for more than 10 years, our pavilion, a partnership with Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs have enabled us to do this, to also have free admission in the pavilion, so many 100,000 people, can experience this architecture. And that is also because there are no doors. Many visitors who would never come to a museum, it's just people who go on a walk in the park. They happen to stroll into the pavilion, which is what I mean, that we bring in new possibilities, new interfaces. And of course, also, again, many partnerships there with the construction industry, partnerships in kind. And then last but not least, the very last thing I wanted to say is, because we spoke about that over lunch, all of us together, that there is also, I think, an increasing possibility for public-private partnerships, between public institutions and private foundations, which goes beyond this idea of sponsorship, which is really a partnership where one does exhibitions together. We can see right now in the world, it's also true, here in Seoul, but it's true very much in Europe, many very dynamic new private foundations who do exhibitions. I was showing earlier, an image also of the Luma Foundation, of Maya Hoffman in Arles, and such partnerships between museums and private foundations are, I think, also a very productive possibilities for institutions in the 21st century.
Thank you so much, Hans-Ulrich, and I'm really glad that you brought up, well, many of those examples, but especially the pavilion that, it is underwritten to a certain degree by Goldman Sachs that allows you to do what you want to do, but that also that's not the only model, that there are many other models that you're using. And a master of these different models is Marcello, so it's a perfect transition to him. And also what you brought up about civic engagement as well, because I see, much of the work that you've done in your career as having this element of civic engagement, figuring out, going to a place and figuring out how do we get the public involved in this process, and what are they looking for in this institution, in quotes. So just a little bit of background on you, and you can give it, but the SUUM Museum that I mentioned earlier is very innovative in its approach. It's actually a museum that's, I would say, grown up from the ground, from the forest. It's immersed completely within the forest. But then there's also this new project that you're working on in Brazil, 30,000 square meters, feet, huge in any case, whether it's feet or meters, it's humongous. And you've brought to life museums in Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, innovative exhibitions with artists like Ai Weiwei, Anish Kapoor, who's opening the museum next week, Jenny Holzer. So you have many different funding models that you've worked on to make this possible. And we were talking yesterday about how the funding model is actually adapted to the project itself. So it's not like you can go in and say, okay, this worked in one place, but it won't necessarily work perfectly in Brazil. So could you please tell us a little bit about your different possibilities?
Good afternoon. The beginning of the problem that I think you're addressing is the question that artwork is not necessarily an artifact. Artwork can be a process, can be an element of transformation or an experience or something else, which may not be tangible, and you need to address that. There are many models from the past that support the arts. Obviously, governments do, collectors do, and all that. However, there are artists that cannot fit in the corporate model. There are projects that cannot work within these parameters. And the other thing that I should say to add to this is that an institution is not necessarily a building. Most people think of an institution as a building. An institution is a place of transformation, a place where something happens that it will alter. This is a good example here. Desert X. We just did it this year, Desert X in Saudi Arabia. And it happens in the middle of the desert. There is no walls, there is no roof, there is nothing. You have to do it in there. And you have to find ways to make it happen to people in nature. In contrast, in Tulum, we built a building that is actually a continuation of the forest in which it all becomes one thing. And then the kind of art that you can put in these kinds of places is not the same kind of art that you would normally collect. It's an art that can face these completely different climates. And then we came to the point that the key aspect that stops a lot of the action in the art world, it is transport. How to make something that can fit to the other place. I mean, you're always limited to that 2.5 meter size of the door of a container. And then everything then has to be contained, or I would call it leashed. And we want unleashed art. We want art that can go beyond the container door. We want art that will happen in space and interact with nature and interact with people. And in order to do that, we have to change the production model, which means that we have to bring the production model closer to where the artwork is going to be presented, which gives the institution a fantastic opportunity not only to present the artwork, but to present the process of making the artwork, which in my opinion is a highly transformative thing. If you see an artist making an artwork, you start creating a different kind of love for the process. You start generating a different kind of connection, which is super positive.
This you're talking about the labs.
The labs, yeah. So we built in Tulum. We had a budget for exhibitions, and we were looking at it, and we said, okay, if we use this money in carbon emission, we'll do 2 or 3 exhibitions. If we use this money in creating a laboratory in the jungle, with CNC, laser, robotic arms, with ceramics department, with weaving, threads, textiles, everything, and employ local people with it, we will probably be more transformative to the local community and to the artists and to the use of new materials, and a lot less harmful for the environment. So we localize, we bring closer the production to the venue.
And I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just think it's very important what you said. It's the same budget. So we're talking about the amount of money it would have taken to ship an artwork over.
Yeah.
You're just transforming that
Transform
budget
this
line into working with the local
into
community.
tools of production that will allow and challenge an artist to be able to deal with that in that context. You know, transporting people has very little impact as opposed to transporting massive amounts of goods. But also, transporting people meaning you're also transporting knowledge. And that person is also learning. So it's a two-way street, so super positive. Then we go into the case. I mean, I'm totally for, and I work a lot in the project that I'm doing in São Paulo. It's very close to corporations, and we work with big banks and everything. But I'm also interested in the problem. For instance, so we did a very big Ai Weiwei exhibition, which I think is what you're seeing here. Ai Weiwei is probably one of the most complicated artists for you to fund because of his anti-government relationship with China. Basically, no single corporation in the world, it's not even the corporation, the lower level, would not even take the proposal higher. They would just stop right there. You know, you don't sponsor Ai Weiwei just because, you know, there might be a deal with China that might be broken up with this, and so it's impossible. But then Ai Weiwei has a fantastic background, which is his direct relationship with an audience. He has built an audience that is so large that his attitudes online can generate a huge public flow. So in 2018, 2019, we made this exhibition with Ai Weiwei at Oca in São Paulo, 6,000 square meters, producing the works in Brazil, using artisans from Brazil, from different, we actually built 4 studios in Brazil to make the work there. Just some works we brought from outside, but most of the works were made in Brazil. And we've told that story during a year. And the result was that this was the most visited exhibition in the world in 2019, which the art newspaper listed with 1.6 million visitors for a single artist, and without any corporate sponsorship, just with some clever tools of selling some multiples, creating artwork that would be sold to collectors, but ticket sales, and people would support it because people would be mobilized because they want to see that, because nobody wants them to. The point is, you are willing to pay for something if no one is willing to give it to you for free. So you have to create that model, that you generate a demand. I mean, art is a lot about scarcity. Mm-hmm. That's the key word of art is scarcity. There is limited supply of it.
In that aspect, I have one question.
Sure.
Because I think this is really interesting to hear that, I mean, Ai Weiwei brought a huge audience and making that exhibition possible. But there was a very big debate, I mean, happened in China. After MMCA, I was working in CAFA, and then we got a very interesting, I mean, anecdote, because the Anish Kapoor, I mean, was the artist, and then, but before Anish Kapoor, Leandro Erlich was actually supposed to do a show, but the CAFA also had a very, I mean, small funding. So at that time, we got a fundraising, but it was a bit difficult at the time. But, well, I mean, the one guy, I mean, put a small money, I mean, to support, like a match funding to make that exhibition possible. But it turns out to be really huge investment because it's also government institution. They cannot get the money because all the money, I mean, goes to the investor. So because that's why after that kind of great success of the highly visited exhibition, the many people say that, oh, you don't have any more exhibition, like a blockbuster exhibition, you're not doing it. So, I mean, that kind of questions are addressed. And then the board member of the museum say that, I think museum, we have to do more experimental and more lesser known artists as well as important artists. I mean, more known artists. That's why, I mean, they were really hesitant, and then what we can make a balance in between the, you know, high visited and very known artists, I mean, exhibition, and then the some of, I mean, lesser known, more experimental artists. Of course, if we can manage the budget, I mean, that'll be the best. But many public institutions in Asia, I mean, they cannot, I mean, hold the budget, I mean, the income. They have to put it back to the treasury, or they have to put it back to the investor or sponsor. So sponsor is not a real sponsor. It became an investor in a way. So, I mean, that sort of, I mean,
So the
issue
proceeds,
also addressed.
sorry, if I understand correctly, the proceeds then went to the initial investor. Okay, yeah, that's
Well, there's a difference
problematic.
between what a sponsor is, what a collector is, what an investor is, what is the audience, and what is different models in which you can, I mean, in some cases, exhibitions may be a profitable thing depending on what scale they're being done. Then that's not impossible. That these, you know, Leandro Ehrlich is a very good case. I mean, there was, I think his exhibition in Tokyo had tickets for $12 million. Which is massive. So these things are not out of the question. I mean, all the model, but there's no one size fits all to these things. I mean, there's no.
No, that's totally true. And at the same time, I think there is one thing which is very important that we, you know, can also in museums, and connects to what you said, that we can do experiments, you know, which sometimes maybe will only resonate in the future, you know, because we also need to think that very often museums and exhibitions are also schools, no, where we can do experiments which maybe not immediately are a blockbuster. So it is all about basically finding a balance, you know, and I do think that there are always possibility also, and that goes back to what you said about the process. I love this idea about the process, the lab, you know, the local operation, because I think that is something which a lot of artists are interested in right now. And I mean, one of the things which I think we should keep in mind in all of the topics we discuss here today is that it's always very, very important to basically listen to artists. It's very important, you know, that the institution, you know, something I think we all do. We have conversations with artists, and out of those we develop the project. And I think that means that we sometimes then also need to kind of change the way we work, because artists, you know, artists transform the institutions. I think, and we need to let that happen. So, to give you an example, right now, I observe quite a lot of artists, and when I visit studios, I mean, I mentioned the thing about video games. That's one thing. You know, I see a lot of artists want to do video games, so we need to find ways that we can enable them to do that. But I also see a lot of artists who are interested in long durational projects, which are not just the duration of an exhibition. You know, for example, we would invite Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, and she would say, I want to do a garden. I don't want to do a show. So, you know, she does a garden in Kensington Gardens for several years for the pollinators, you know, and we basically work with AI. She works with AI to do something. It's not for us humans. It's almost for the pollinators, for the bees, you know, but we can also enjoy. And so we need to think what that means, you know, and what does it mean if all of a sudden artists want to do gardens and if they also want to do farms? You have so many artists right now, you know, Adrian Villar-Rojas, we mentioned Inka Shonibare, you evoked Inka Shonibare, we have, you know, Otobong Nekanga. They all want to do farming projects. You know, what does that mean? You know, and how does the museum have to change to accommodate that in a way? And I think that's super important.
This is the number one question that I make to artists today, which is your project relevant to any other species other than yours? Just to know, I mean, have you related in your process to any other species? I mean, does it have any impact, positive or negative? Are you capable of knowing if you, because this is an environmental question, very important environmental question. When we neglect the existence of other species, that's when we start destroying our environment. When we don't care that we've produced a certain buzz, and that buzz is going to kill every bee around this neighborhood. And we're not aware that that frequency might be disrupting somebody, or the other way around. I have worked with, this is a beautiful project, with Vivian Kakuri, you know Vivian, and she she recorded the speech of ants. and then she amplified in a speaker made out of sugar, and amplified the speech of ants back to the ants. And the ants came and they ate up the entire speaker and made the sculpture for her. So it's a collaboration between artists and ants in a way that she is trying to speak the language of ants, and the ants are coming back and doing some job for her. So she just makes a block, and the ants end up doing the sculpture. I mean, these are models that museums are not ready for, because if you tell a normal museum that I need to bring the ants in, or whatever, or the bats, or I need to bring these other creatures in because they need to collaborate, or the rats. The rats do exist in museums. I mean, but we need them now to work with us. And this is the kind of problems that, or the exhibition that you did at Bayer with Precious. Oh, come on.
The summer exhibition.
Yeah, the summer exhibition. And suddenly you have to do a greenhouse and all these plants and all these things. I mean, this will have an impact. But our ability to relate to this other dimension, that is this parallel dimension that is non-human, is essential. I mean, this is the borderline of where we are. I mean, AI is super important. I think games is a language, but I think the real challenge, it is realizing whether this planet fits us all, and us all meaning all species around us.
So you're all visionaries, right? And you all are sold, in a way, on these concepts and these ideas of giving the space, being open-minded, letting artists do what artists do best, letting them dream. But you also have to be salespeople, right? I mean, you've got to go kind of sell these projects.
But we have to sell these ideas.
Exactly. You have to sell.
Not other ideas.
Exactly. So these are the kinds of ideas that we need, I would argue, as a society. But I'd love for one of you to talk a little bit about how you adapt to, depending on who's in front of you and who you're trying to convince of these kinds of projects. Because I imagine if you go to ex-corporate sponsor and say, I'd like to fund, bees pollinating in the jungle. Mm-hmm. How do you do it?
But it's interesting because, Marcello, you mentioned the summer show, no? And we did this show with Philippe Barreno and Precious Okoyaman and
Tino.
Sam Keller, and of course Tino Segal and Isabella Mora and Mona McQuay in Bayer. And the show changed title every day. So that created a wonderful confusion because every article has a different title. The reviews have different titles. So it was the exhibition as a living organism. And that is an example for the partnership between a museum and a foundation. It was Bayer Foundation and Luma Foundation in collaboration. So that goes back to what I mentioned before. But I think one other thing is really important, which is if we think about long durational projects of artists, we also need to think about long durational projects of funding. And I think that these multi-year partnerships, where basically the partners trust each other, because if you basically go and, have a fundraising proposals about projects we've just been describing, this is very, very complicated, to basically just fundraise for that. But if it's part of a multi-year arrangement, so I was mentioning, for example, with our pavilion with the Goldman Sachs 10 years, that allows us now to also work with younger architects. Because at the beginning, we could only do star architects, because otherwise we don't find the funding. Yeah. And now we have this partnership, so we can do, Frida Escobedo, Minzukchu, architects.
You build trust.
Not yet household names.
A track record,
exactly.
And you
build
the trust.
The trust. And that also, for example, with technology, we have this partnership with Ryan Zura, with 10F1, now over several years, and that allows us to do, technology projects. So I think longue durée for art, but also longue durée for partnerships. Yeah.
I'd love to leave a little bit of time for questions. Amazingly, we only have 10 minutes left, so we can keep talking. We have many things to say, but I'll turn to the audience in case there are any questions. Otherwise, we'll go back to our conversation. Does anyone have a question? And maybe we have a mic that we can pass on. Anyone? Don't be shy. Okay, well, we'll just keep up our discussions about. Well, I want to get back to the priorities evolving in recent years in light of the crisis that we're dealing with. We've touched on it, But maybe one of you, I don't know if June, you can talk about how kind of in response to all of these global crises that we're dealing with, you might have changed the kinds of projects that you're working on yourself and that you're seeking funding for.
Okay, in that aspect, maybe I can refer to one of our Korean company, LG Electronics, engagement in art and humanities right now. Because it was during the period of COVID start, and then I come back to Seoul, and then I've been jammed here. Because when I come to Seoul, everybody said, "Oh my gosh, you are going to Wuhan," and Seoul, no, don't go. But when I come back and Europe closed down, and Korea really, started to flourish for that period. But LG was not that strong, sponsorship company in art, in some ways, but not this much stronger, because they became the major Freeze Seoul sponsor, and then they now really support many of great artists. As you said, that they maybe start with the big names, but now supporting many great young artists at the moment. But when I approached it to LG, was not asking for the, just big, LG platform sponsorship. It was very much like, oh, can we, ask for a couple of screens for one of the artists that we are working with? But they, start to, into really serious consideration. And why don't we make this LG very fine, OLED, bendable and a very thin, panel for some other, artistic expression. So that's where we start to experiment of those, projects, and we commission iArt, one of the artists in Basel. They actually make a moving kinetic flower out of LG screen. People actually do not recognize that's made out of the LG product, screen. But the artists, when they have a chance to do some experiments, they can do something. They didn't know what they can do at the first stage, but they start to make it. That really, kind of one or two cases success. They believe, why don't we really, start to put it onto, making this platform. So now LG made LG OLED art platform, and from that platform, they provide lots of international artists along with Korean artists. Also, they start to sponsor some of the museums which focus on the technology programs and AI research, really serious engagement. But at the same time, in the end, we made a collaboration with Guggenheim for 5 years contract. So after 5 years, well, now 3 years gone already. So 2 years later, LG OLED platform is going to make an exhibition at the Guggenheim, focusing on what they have been really, developing with this new sponsorship, new engagement with the creativity, how, those creativity brought a forms of exhibition in the end. So I think, we have really, talk about this engagement and new partnership, but I think the trust and then try, and then I think artist-led, I think can be very, important, point, I think.
But I think going out of the comfort zone, because the corporate sponsorship is going to happen whether we want it or not, because brands in the world are recognizing that art is a way for them to create an image. And all the major luxury brands are directly producing art. And this is not even a trend anymore. This is gone. This is history already. The question is, how are we going to be able to make projects that do not fit this model? Because this model is sort of taken care of. Cartier is not going to stop doing art. No, neither will Louis Vuitton, none of them. They are committed to it.
But there may be some strings attached.
But there are some strings attached. And the question is
even
how
subconsciously,
subconsciously,
self-censorship or self,
we self-censor.
Yeah, exactly.
We wouldn't dare to propose a situation for this. And then as curators, we have to think of how can we fertilize ideas that would not fit into that model. How can we respond, either as institutions or as articulators of these possibilities? Can we create context that will produce this expansion and then allow for new things to happen. Otherwise, we will be very obedient, and that's not a good thing.
We haven't really spoken about it, but awards, I don't know if you would agree with this premise, but awards could be one way to do that because you open it up, an open call, which I know you've done with a recent...
With AI and nature.
Yeah, AI and Nature Award. It's one way to do it, but there are other ways, I'm sure, Hans Ulrich, that you have ways that you've been encouraging this kind of environment. You talked about many of them earlier. We only have a few minutes left, and I'd like each of you to have the opportunity to just say in a couple of sentences, in your view, what is the ideal model for the institution of tomorrow?
There's none.
Yeah. Thought you'd probably say that. No ideal model. It's that there has to be adapted.
There's no one-size-fits-all, for sure. I mean, I think each country, very important thing to take in consideration. Putting Saudi Arabia in context. Saudi Arabia is a country that did not have cinema until 2018. And their first art exhibition in this contemporary era was in 2020. So for a long time, there's no grammar for the people to really understand what are we talking about. There was no reference. And it has to be a government thing because that's how the whole thing works. So how do we bring this new perception to people? How do we go into these new territories? This is new territories, this is uncharted territory. And you have to create a grammar of what is acceptable to that culture. Right. And in each culture, you're going to find there are some limitations, which are not only financial. It might be behavior, culture, modes of action. I mean, these things also.
So the approach, you have to adapt the approach.
You're going to have to adapt. There is no one-size-fits-all at all.
Hans Ulrich, you said, I
just want to answer your question because it's such an interesting question because I don't think I have an ideal kind of model either, but I do think that it's interesting. Your question is interesting also in relation to maybe what is missing, no? Exactly. And I think, I mean, there are unrealized museum models from which we can learn. I mean, I've often quoted Edouard Glissant, the Martinican writer, who invested years of his time into an unrealized model of a museum in Martinique. And I think that is unbuilt, and we can learn because he wanted to look for, he told me that he wanted to look for an utopian point where all the world's cultures and imaginations can meet, and most importantly, hear one another. And I think that is something the world would really need today, because it's something every city, in a way, would need. And then, I mean, we have been working not on an ideal museum, but on a kind of a dream of ours, with Tino Segal now for many years, which is kind of our idea of the Fun Palace, because in the 60s, John Littlewood, who was a street theater pioneer, and the cybernetic architect Cedric Price, had this idea of an institution which would be utterly interdisciplinary, where it would be porous, it would be fluid, and you could have, all the disciplines. And we basically, on a smaller scale, with Tino, tried to do that. We did it as a prelude in New York at some point for the Shed with Kunle Adeyemi. We did it in a pop music festival in Denmark, in Roskilde, again with Kunle Adeyemi. And, in that experience, I really saw something which I think in our society is missing and which would be amazing one day to develop on a bigger scale, which is this idea of an institution where, you can have a lecture as we have it here today. And you have to imagine the architecture was very fluid. So all of a sudden the walls would go down and it would be open air and you could have a concert. So that our conference here would now develop maybe into a rap concert. And then all of a sudden the walls would semi-close again and you would have, a choreography situation. Tino would do a piece and then all of a sudden it would completely be closed and you would have an exhibition. And this would somehow, almost like in an opera where you have or in a theater where you have the sets, it sort of could be, and that is somehow on a smaller scale possible, and we tried to sketch it, but whenever, it was tried to do on a bigger scale, of course the beginning of the Pompidou was very inspired by that idea, but it was, not sustainable to do that, and the Fun Palace was unrealized. So that's definitely, I'm not sure if it's the ideal situation, but it is kind of the unrealized museum, cultural institution towards which we are working on.
So a very fluid model, not even a model, it's flowing from one experience to the next. It's all about the experiences. And in fact, that's actually a great segue because we're going to be talking about that in some of the other panels later. But Ji-yoon, I'll give you our time is up, but of course you can have the last word.
No. I mean, I just wanted to say that it's a really, inspirational, and I am also 100% agree with what you are sharing today now. Because I think, there is no such the perfect model or some sort of model we can really define, now, because everything is changing and evolving this moment too. But I think, the museum experience is not just going there to see one art. It's not. I think everything is so connected. And then really interdisciplinary, expansion is going to be the one. Because the moment you arrive the parking lot, from that moment to getting into the floor and then finding a one room and the other and finding a program, you can easily check it out what kind of direction this museum and institution is looking for, at least to somewhere from one of the small leaflet or where you can really feel that. So I think this kind of total choreographing of your experiences in art and design and culture, and even with the ants, I think, that's the way maybe we can move forward.
Thank you. It's about building your own experience, I think, in a lot of ways. Thank you so much to our panelists. It was a great discussion. We're going to move on to the next discussion, but in about 15, 20 minutes, we'll have a little break. And of course, I think they're open to it. Approach our speakers individually if you'd like to ask them a few questions one-on-one. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much.